Hey ladies, welcome to the Grit, Growth, Grace podcast. If we haven't met, my name is Anne Marie. I'm wife to James and mom to 4 beautiful kids, plus 1 miscarried baby, from 9 months up to 8 years. My hope is to help other women experience the postpartum period, all the way up to the first year of baby's life, as a time of grit, growth, and grace. This is episode 5. When you're flying by the seat of your stretchy maternity leggings. Hey lady, last week we talked about how to ask for help when your family can't or won't help you out. I talked about forming your grandma tribe and encouraged you to write down your answers to the question, who can help me and what can they help me with? You increase the chances that your grandma tribe, family members, etc. will help you when you make it easy for them to do so by asking them to help from their strengths, the things they're already good at. But you and I both know there are certain specific things we need help with postpartum. Trouble is, once you think of one thing you need help with, it can be like a game of mental whack-a-mole. I need help with this, and this, and this thing, and that over there. It's like that book when you give a mouse a cookie, but for grown-ups. And then before you know it, you're not asking anyone for help with anything because you're overwhelmed. And it's 4 o'clock in the morning, and your baby pooped, and your belly feels very squishy, and the decorative band is peeling off the lampshade on the lamp next to your rocking chair. Where do you even start? Take a deep breath. You can do this, and you're not alone. I've been there too. First, I want to ask you, do you tend towards Hot Mess Express mom mode or Type A plus mom mode? I have to acknowledge that I didn't think up Type A plus. It came from a book by Lisa Cotter called Reveal the Gift, Living the Feminine Genius. And actually, I think it came from her husband as the title for her. It resonated so deeply with my recovering perfectionist heart when I read it. Mercy. But speaking in hardcore caricatures, and I'm doing that on purpose because I want you to laugh a little. If you're in your Hot Mess Express mode during postpartum, that might look like all the screen time for your other kids, takeout for all your meals, no showers, and frequent self-soothing, by which I mean scrolling on Instagram. Even with all the Bessie bun, big hair, don't care, you're still somehow exhausted. On the other hand, if you're in your Type A plus mom mode, that might look like jumping right back into your HIIT classes at 6 weeks, baking 4 things for the Friends of the Library's fundraising bake sale, and writing thank you notes with each addressee's name in calligraphy. Girl, you crushing it, except maybe you're about to blow a fuse. Can I tell you the movie scene that comes to mind for Type A plus mode? You might be too young to remember this, but in the movie Freaky Friday, the one with Lindsay Lohan, there's this scene where her character's mom, Jamie Lee Curtis, is sitting cross-legged on the floor, meditating, in between painting each fingernail red and blowing on it to dry, all while answering beeps on her BlackBerry. Yes, her BlackBerry. I was so impressed. I admired her multitasking, her productivity. But now I know that kind of pace leads to exhaustion, and I bet you do too. So what's the alternative to Hot Mess Express mom mode and Type A plus mom mode? I learned about it from my sister, who heard about it from her coach in the Women's School's postpartum course. My sister and I have developed a habit. After all, 2 points make a line, right? Of getting pregnant and giving birth 3 weeks or less apart. We've done this with my youngest 2 and her first 2. So she took this course, and the coach shared this book, The Lazy Genius Way by Kendra Adachi. And when my sister told me about it, her actual words were, "You should read it so you can tell me all about it." And you know what? She was 100% right. It was my go-to postpartum read and my favorite book of 2023. And here's the heart of it. Be a genius about the things that matter to you and lazy about the things that don't. This couldn't be more appropriate for the postpartum period. To handle the challenges of little sleep, an older kid or kids, feeding, clothing, laundering, dishwashing, all the other household tasks, shifts in your relationship with your spouse, not to mention potentially breastfeeding troubles, medical issues for the baby or for you. To handle all these things, you need to get strategic. And that means getting real clarity around what actually matters to you. Kendra has a 3-step process, 3 questions to use to get clarity on what matters most to you. We will use this process over and over again. Here are the 3 questions. Number 1, what could matter to me? Number 2, what does matter? And number 3, what matters most? Let's do an example right now, just so you can see it in practice. I wanted to lazy genius, which is now a verb, our meals postpartum. Question number 1, what could matter to me? Highly tasty foods with complex flavors and textures could matter. Meals from only organic ingredients could matter. Cheap meals could matter. Meals that take 5 ingredients or less could matter. Meals that come together in less than half an hour could matter most. Meals I already know how to make could be important. Highly nutritious meals could be important. But here's question number 2. What does matter to me? Well, my top 3 things for postpartum meals would be least expensive or most budget friendly, things I already know how to make, and nutritious. But here's the kicker. They can't all matter equally to me. Question number 3 is where the magic happens, where the clarity comes because I plant my flag somewhere. When it comes to postpartum meals, what is most important to me? Postpartum, the most important thing for me was to prepare meals I already knew how to make. I did not attempt a new main dish recipe in the first 3 months postpartum. Now, I also said that budget was important to me. Not most important, but important. So did our budget go out the window during that time? No, it did not. But I chose not to sweat a higher grocery bill some weeks because my number 1 priority was not cost. It was making meals I already knew how to make, because those cost me the least brain power. Similarly, did providing nutrient-dense food cease to matter postpartum? No, I still bought lots of fruits and veggies, but there were also a fair amount of snacks and delicious comfort foods, here high carb, prepared for us by kind people. And I didn't sweat those things either, because highly nutritious meals were not my number 1 priority. A lovely little byproduct of answering these 3 questions on getting clear about what matters most to you is that you end up dropping a lot of mom guilt and comparison in the process. If you've ever felt self-conscious about seeming extra, about something no one else makes a fuss over, the Lazy Genius Way helps you let that go. If something matters deeply to you, be a genius about it. Kendra gave the example of baking bread from scratch. People asked her, how is that the Lazy Genius Way? Baking bread takes a long time. Yes, but it matters to her. Baking bread matters to her. When you know what matters to you, you know where to direct your time. If baking bread doesn't matter to you, a loaf off the shelf at Aldi will be lovely, thank you very much, and on your way. But if it matters to you, do it. Earlier, I gave the example of type A plus mom mode, hustling back into HIIT workouts 6 weeks, baking 4 treats for the library bake sale, and addressing thank you notes with calligraphy. That pretty much describes me postpartum with my first child, except for the calligraphy, which I don't know how to do. Over the postpartums since, I've slowed my roll on working out postpartum. But here's the thing. When my now youngest was 6 weeks old, I still made several desserts for the library bake sale because baking matters to me. Baking is enjoyable and a lovely way for me to contribute. So I chose to spend less energy that particular day on other things and to rely on the TV to keep my kids occupied for several hours. And I put that time and effort into that enjoyable activity. Remember, being a lazy genius doesn't mean you're lazy about everything. It means you're strategic. Likewise, I still write thank you notes, usually 1 a day, because expressing gratitude in that way is important to me. On the flip side, what's something you might choose to be lazy about? Well, you might not bake your own bread, for instance, but I also don't buy or make baby food anymore. It's easier for me, starting at 6 months, to just start breaking off the tiniest particles imaginable of whatever food's on the table and feeding those to the baby. Tiny bits of sweet potatoes, banana, salmon, cheese, steamed broccoli, hamburger bun. So I'm lazy in that way, and it works well for me. When you're a lazy genius about your priorities postpartum, you learn to stop apologizing for caring more or less about things than other people do. When you're a lazy genius about your priorities postpartum, you learn to stop apologizing for caring more or less about things than other people do. When it was our turn to bring treats for my son's baseball team, I made chocolate chip cookies. Every single other teammate, when it was their turn, brought some type of processed food. Oreos, Pringles, Cheez-Its, Rice Krispies, plus a sugary drink, Capri Sun, Gatorade. I'm not judging anyone else for providing those snacks. Heck, my son enjoys them. But I do things differently, and I don't apologize for that, nor do I worry about being called an overachiever, which we all know isn't a compliment. There's one question I'd love to leave you with, to consider maybe during baby's next feeding. It puts kind of a pretty bow on the lazy genius way, which, like I said, we'll return to over and over again, because it's like the Swiss Army knife of postpartum. Here's the question. Am I being exhausted by activities, commitments, relationships, or costs that don't matter to me? More bluntly, am I being exhausted by activities, commitments, relationships, or costs that I don't care about? I'll give you a couple examples to maybe get you started and then let you be. During counseling, I realized that I was pouring time and effort into several relationships where there was just not reciprocity. I was putting in 95% of the effort, believing that I was ministering to these women, who were very different from each other and who I knew in very different contexts, but the end result was the same. Again, though, I told myself I was ministering to them, but it was depleting and exhausting, and I was failing to acknowledge the reality of what they were wanting our relationship to be, not accepting that I am not their savior, and that takes humility. But it's been much easier to accept the reality, or much easier. It wasn't much easier. It's been much healthier to accept the reality that what they're able to give and what I'm able to give maybe look different from what I originally would have thought. We stay in touch, but less so. And you know what? Their lives have gone on. An activity plus cost I realized didn't matter to me was my daughter's gymnastics class. And in part, it doesn't matter to me because I recognize that it doesn't matter to her. It was with driving an hour and 45 minutes every week, plus $80 a month of her generous godfather's money, for something she didn't end up learning as much from as we would have expected. Instead, this fall, she'll hopefully join American Heritage Girls, which is less than 10 minutes from our house, happens once a month, and she's pumped to be part of. So lady, the heart of the lazy genius way is to be a genius about the things that matter to you, and lazy about the things that don't. As you get clarity on your priorities by asking what could matter, what does matter, and what matters most, you'll determine where you want to ask for help. Keep in mind, you are not committed to these priorities forever. I tend to think roughly in terms of 3 months at a time, since that's how long a season is, and it's about how often major shifts happen in that baby's first year of life and in your postpartum recovery. So for the next 3 months, what matters most to you about fill in the blank? And if you want to do some general mental housekeeping, ask yourself, am I being exhausted by activities, commitments, relationships, or costs that don't matter to me? Next time, we'll be talking about all the things you can't control, because I can hear you from here saying, Anne-Marie, a lot of my priorities are already set for me. There's a ton I can't control. My baby's colic, for instance, I can't just mind manage that away. Lady, I hear you. We'll get there next time. I'll talk to you then. One more thing. If you enjoyed this episode, would you please rate the podcast on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and share it with a mom friend. And if you want to get in touch, my Instagram account is @GritGrowthGrace.